The next thing we're going to learn is how to dynamically update the attributes and stylings of elements in our DOM. So we're back in our index.html file, and we'll notice that I went ahead and hard-coded these two paragraphs that we were creating dynamically in the last section. And that's simply so we can just focus on adjusting their attributes and stylings via JavaScript rather than having to dynamically create them as well. So this is still quite simple in our index.html file, and let's look at our app.js file to see what we want to do in order to adjust these attributes and styles. And we'll begin by having, of course, our main div variable that selects our main element by ID. And then we'll also include this new variable called par_elements, which stands for paragraph elements. And here we select elements by tag name and pass in a P, which stands for paragraph. And one thing we'll note as well is that whereas getElementById is element singular, getElements by tag name is plural. And the reason for that is that we should only have one element with this particular ID, but we can of course have multiple elements with this particular tag name. And then we simply log these elements to our console so we can inspect their differences. And let's go to our browser to do that now. And what we see is rather quite interesting. When we log just a single object to the console, it prints out that kind of raw HTML. But when we have multiple elements that we've selected, it prints out a collection of those elements. So in essence, an array of elements, and it shows the indices and then the type of element. In this case, they're both paragraph elements, and if we expand them, we can see the properties and methods available to us. So for instance, one property is this inner HTML property that we became familiar with in a previous section, and we see here that its inner HTML value is simply Chevy, which is what we would expect. Now, if we go down lower to, for instance, this onClick method, it says null, and that's because we haven't yet defined a function for this onClick method for this particular element. And we'll learn how to do this later in the class when we talk about JavaScript functions, but essentially what we can do is assign a function to this method that'll be executed whenever we click on a particular element. So it's pretty cool and pretty powerful. But one last thing that we want to be conscientious of is that even though in our console it doesn't show all these same methods and properties for a single DOM element or DOM object as it does when we print out this collection, all these same methods and properties are still available for this individual element we selected by ID, but it's just cleaner to show that individual element by its raw HTML rather than by this collection of DOM elements. So with that, let's go back into our index.html file and our app.js file and start styling the properties of these different elements that we have on our web page. And we style elements in our DOM as follows. First, we select the element that we want to style. Now in this case, our main div is a single element, but our par_elements is an array of elements. So we need to individually select the index of the element that we want to style. Then we select the .style property, and finally the actual property that we want to set a value for. Now what we'll notice is that unlike in CSS, where our individual words are broken out by a dash, so we would have background dash color all lowercase. In JavaScript, remember, convention is to use camel case, so a lowercase background but then an uppercase C in the word color, and we set that property to hex code 00F. So we expect the background color of our main div element to be pure blue. Then we select each of our paragraphs within the document and we set each of their colors to hex code FFF. So we expect all of our paragraph elements to have a white color property. Now let's go back to the browser to make sure that this is actually the case. And indeed it is. And one important thing that we'll notice is that now both our div element and our paragraph elements have these inline styles that we added via JavaScript. So that's really cool that we can dynamically style elements on our web page using JavaScript.